John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, Oxford professor, master of the languages and literatures of the ancient North, poet, storyteller, creator of the Ents, the Orcs, the Hobbits, the High Elves, the Black Riders, of Rivendell, Lothlorien and the Misty Mountains, of Mirkwood and the Black Land of Mordor, of the Fellowship of the Ring and the Dark Lord, J.R.R. Tolkien, maker of Middle-earth. The world of Tolkien's books was already forming in his mind during his school days at King Edward's in Birmingham, and later as an undergraduate at Oxford University. His third son and literary executor, Christopher Tolkien, who lives in France with his wife Bailey, has edited and published many writings that were left in manuscript form at his father's death. He speaks of the nature of Tolkien's world, what he himself called a secondary world.
In his secondary world, which he worked on all his life, he developed it to this extraordinary vastness, solidity, and coherence, which is, I suppose, unique. And this secondary world, which is usually referred to as mistakenly, but entirely understandably, as Middle-earth, this comprehensive secondary world, inevitably it's his world. Its content will be his content. It will contain his griefs, his hopes, his experience, his concept of beauty and ugliness, his concept of good and evil. It will not be an ideal world. He wasn't interested in utopias, far from it. But it will too, inevitably, I think, be an archaic world in some aspects. Its archaism shows itself at once in the relatively small space that the man-made takes in it in relation to the world we inhabit now. And for him, the man-made was the great problem. He once said to me, you know, it isn't the not man, like the weather, nor man, even at a bad level. It's the man-made that is so ultimately daunting and insupportable. So his secondary world contains an extraordinarily small, relatively speaking to our world, amount of the man-made. And it's very well known, it's often said, he disliked the modern world. Of course, this is absolutely true. But what I would like to say is that it was absolutely inevitable that he should. It springs from exactly the same source as his desire for fantasy. In the modern world, the word modern is the word that has to be emphasized. He loved the world, and he was in no conceivable sense a misanthrope. The modern world meant for him essentially the machine. And once again, this was a word that he tried to enlarge, so that when he speaks of the machine, and he more than once expressly said that it was one of the underlying themes for him in The Lord of the Rings, was the machine. But we should think of something rather more than what the word machine naturally suggests to us, trains, motor cars, aeroplanes. He used it very compendiously to mean almost, you might say, an alternative solution to the development of the innate and inherent powers and talents of human beings. The machine meant for him, the wrong solution, the attempt to actualize our desires, like our desire to fly. It meant coercion, domination, for him the great enemy, coercion of other minds and other wills. This is tyranny. But he also saw the characteristic activity of the modern world as the coercion, the tyrannous reformation of the earth, our place. That is really why he hated machines. Of course, it's perfectly true. He hated the internal combustion engine for perfectly good practical reasons. I mean, noise, congestion, destruction of cities, and many people greatly agree with him now.
And Tolkien's distaste extended to modern, labour-saving machinery.
He used to sort of say, you only move the slavery out of sight, so it's much more effective, because nobody knows what's going on. So you put them in the factories where you can't see them.
He actually mentioned this in a letter that I think is worth quoting, that he wrote to me when I was in South Africa. And he spoke of the tragedy and despair of all machinery laid bare. Unlike art, which is content to create a new secondary world in the mind, it attempts to actualize desire, and so to create power in this world. And that cannot really be done with any real satisfaction. Labor-saving machinery only creates endless and worse labor. In addition to this fundamental disability of a creature is added the fall, which makes our devices not only fail of their desire, but turn to new and horrible evil. And so we come inevitably from Daedalus and Icarus to the giant bomber. And, of course, in his secondary world, the machine is, as he would say, mythologized, in the mythological mode, because he is dealing entirely in the representation of his perception of the primary world in the secondary world form, the world, if you like, of Middle-earth. And I think it is undoubtedly true that in this very large sense of the word machine, the supreme machine in the mythological terms is the ring, is the one ring. This, of course, may seem extraordinary, because many people would feel like saying, oh, but surely the ring is the most magic thing of all. To which he would have said, magic is very close to the machine. Magic is coercion, is the coercion of the world, the attempt by apparatus to transform the world. And indeed, the elves, as he again said, in saying all this, I'm largely drawing on what he himself said, putting it in my way. The elves represent, obviously they represent in a sense an aspect, they must do, of the humane. They represent an aspect of mankind, but raised in certain directions to a higher power, with powers that men don't actually possess. And that the ultimate aim of the elves is art and not power, whereas men have taken the solution of power represented by the machine. The ring is the ultimate machine because it was made for coercion, made by Sauron to coerce. And that is why the only solution to the problem of the ring, as the wise at Rivendell saw, was its destruction. And if the ring were not destroyed, it wouldn't in the long run matter whether Sauron got it himself. As he said once, Gandalf, if he had the ring, would be far worse than Sauron, because he would be righteous and self-righteous and coerce the world to its own good. And that was one of my father's greatest fears, was the coercion for good ends. He wasn't an unreasonable man, he wasn't an eccentric, he wasn't absurd. And of course he recognized that one must live in the world to an extent as it is. So he had a telephone, he even had a tape recorder when they were quite newfangled. But as a vision of how the world could be, the machinery of telecommunications, just as much as the airliner, no, they were not what he wanted in the world. I remember sitting with him when I must have been quite a small boy on the White Horse Hill in Berkshire, looking down over the Vale of the White Horse, through which the Great Western Railway line goes towards Bath and Bristol. And I think even then I appreciated his intense awareness of that hill, the archaic carving in the chalk of the White Horse, the bones of the hill, One can see Weathertop in that. But I also love the soundless sight in the valley of the train with the line of smoke from it. But he didn't. He didn't. He saw it as the intrusion of coercion into the Vale, carrying people at high speed to destinations that they would be very much better off going by other means.